The Smoke and Gavel podcast is now in session. I'm retired Judge Chip Small, who will preside over the podcast along with my bailiff, Madeline Rose. We welcome you and ask you to join us as we take a look at our justice system from a unique, candid, and inside view. Maddie, what's on the docket today?
Okay, Your Honor. Today we're going to share your thoughts on the death penalty. That's a really sensitive one. And then we're going to continue the story of true justice, but before we do that, one of our listeners complained that in our last episode, you didn't share your views about what judges to avoid. So can you start with that? What kind of judges to avoid?
Sure. First off, they don't have any power.
Judges don't have power.
Right. Personally, the individual judge, Jane Doe, doesn't have any personal power. All her power comes from the office she holds. Now, the one thing we do have the power to do personally is we get to decide when we go into the courtroom and when we come out. That might not seem like a lot, but it's actually a lot of power.
Like recess.
Right.
When we hear that in the Law and Order.
Right. Or if a case is going to be heard, you don't have to go in. I mean, you can delay things. I mean, you can continue it on your own motion, whatever. And so that's significant. I mean, for example, if a judge is about to lose their temper, then he can just say, we're going to take a short recess. No one knows why the judge said that, and then he can go in the jury room and
like
scream.
The last time that you did your gavel when your one juror fell asleep.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the power, that individual power of when we go in and when we come out is significant, but that's the only real power we have. And I say that because where our power comes from is the office we hold. Just like the President of the United States, Donald Trump doesn't have any power except he holds the office of President of the United States. So that office has power. The office of the presidency.
I remember checks and balances, right? Is that kind of what we're talking about in a way?
No, that's more legislative, judicial, and executive kind of fighting each other.
But aren't judges right now overturning some of Trump's stuff in Washington State, for example?
Yeah.
So that's an example for when a judge does have power? I mean, I don't know.
It's related, but it's not exactly what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about
so we're in a normal case we're talking about today.
All the time. Okay. Every time you see a judge in court. What the caution is, fear the judge who speaks in first person singular. In other words, if a judge is saying, I do this, I rule this way, I'm doing this, I sentence you, stay away.
I don't think this, I don't feel that.
Stay away from that judge.
I believe this.
What the judge should be doing is saying, the court rules this way. The court sentenced you to this. It should always be third person, not first person. In fact, it's not easy. I mean, you get in that position, it's easy to accidentally speak in first person. Right. So what I did to try to avoid doing that, I had a little jar back in judges' chambers, and my court reporter would pay attention to what I was saying because she's writing everything down. And whenever I said boom, I had to put money in the jar.
Okay.
Until we had enough money to buy some treats for the court staff. And then eventually I started not ever saying I, and it was always the court, the court, the court. And it's important because not only it reminds the judge that it's not her that's doing this, it's the position she holds that gives her this authority. But it also tells the public that it's not a personal thing. We're just exercising the authority we have because of the office we hold, not because Judge Chip doesn't want so-and-so to do anything. No, if the law says they can't do it, then the court will rule that they can't do it.
Right. So
it's not a personal thing. So you're telling the public you understand that it's not you, it's the office you hold. So that's why I tell people fear the judge that speaks in first person singular. Because it's my opinion. I mean, other judges may disagree, but that's my opinion.
You know, and I just think that's a normal thing in general. People take to that better. Like, if I sit there and I say, I feel this way, people are not going to respect that as much as I say, we feel this way.
Right.
Or
the courts reviewed all the evidence.
Yeah. It's just even with the normal person, like if I came up with this big, great idea, but then if I'm attached to maybe like a business, if I say we did, it's going to look more legitimate.
Right.
And same with the courts. Like, we all have different beliefs, and I'm sure every judge does, but that's not what the ruling should be about. It's about what the law is, and the judges aren't making the laws, the legislative branch is, and that's a whole nother issue if people want to take that up, if they want to take up the law. I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Spot on. I mean, truthfully, the first couple years I was on the bench, I had a lot of cases where the attorneys were wanting me to change the law.
But you can't.
Right. And so I kept explaining to them that they're in the wrong side of the street, because in Olympia, Temple of Justice on one side of the street and the legislature on the other side. So I kept sending them, no, if you don't like the law, you don't come here.
Yeah.
You go over to the legislature. And after a couple of years of those rulings, maybe 3 years, they stopped asking me to do that because they knew I was going to say no.
Right. And I've helped a friend or two look at their cases, and I've noticed one thing is that a lot of times when people are presenting cases to judges, they're bringing up past rulings and current laws if they're going to be trying to go against what the current law is. They have to actually show history and rulings. So, and that's a different thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm sure our listeners want to know what your thoughts are on the death penalty. Don't some people deserve it? After all, an eye for an eye, right?
Okay.
Karma.
Okay, the purpose of today's podcast isn't to debate. Everybody has their own views on that. Some very religious people are for it. Some very religious people are against it. But what I do want to do is share what the death penalty means for judges and my observations on the practical, not moral, but the practical ramifications of having the death penalty.
Practical ramifications of death. Okay.
So first, what it means for judges. For me, before I submitted my name to be considered by the governor to be appointed to the Superior Court bench, I had to know whether I could perform the duties of the office. And that could involve a capital case that if the defendant were found guilty of aggravated first-degree murder, I may have to sign a death warrant. So I spent a fair amount of time praying about it, researching what my church taught me. Can I do this? Can I not do it? And eventually I convinced myself I could do it because at that time I considered the death penalty self-defense with due process. And what I mean by that is if someone like a police officer was there at the time they were committing whatever the offense was that was aggravated first-degree murder, the officer could just blow them away right then. But because they did it and didn't get caught initially, well, they're entitled to a trial and due process and all that.
Right.
And so I decided, no, it was moral for me to sign a death warrant. If I hadn't decided that, then I never would have submitted my name. So that's the first thing I think the death penalty affects judges, the first way it affects them. Now,
I'm going to cut you off there, Chip, for a commercial break. The Smoking Gavel podcast is sponsored by Judge Small Books and Gatekeeper Press, a full-service publishing company empowering authors with complete creative control, professional guidance, and 100% royalties. Whether you're publishing your first book or your 10th, their team makes the process simple, transparent, and truly author-friendly. Listeners of the show can receive 10% off any publishing package with Gatekeeper Press. Just mention code CHIPSMALL when requesting a quote or during your free consultation at gatekeeperpress.com.
Okay, so now my practical observations of having the death penalty, what the consequences are. You first have to understand the process. And in our state anyway, there are basically two trials. First, there's a trial to determine whether the defendant is guilty. And second is another trial, if he is found guilty, to determine whether the defendant should be sentenced to death. So if the jury decides that what the defendant did warrants the penalty of death, what follows is an automatic appeal under our court rules and almost always an unending number of other appeals in federal court, wherever. And those appeals can take years. So closure for the victim's family and friends is delayed for a long time. In fact, if one of the appeals is successful, it might result in the order for a new trial and they start all over again, or the sentence may be commuted to life without parole. However, in most criminal cases that involve the death penalty, and in most criminal cases overall, they're resolved by plea bargain. And the worst death case I ever presided over, in fact, ended with a plea bargain. And what happened was the state agreed to drop the request for a death sentence as long as the defendant pled guilty to life without parole. What that meant for the victims and their families was there was no trial, and by pleading guilty, there's no appeal, none. He's sentenced to life without parole, and the case is done. So closure for the victims and their families is certain, and it's very quick.
Right.
And so regardless of whether you believe the death penalty is moral or not, that's a practical ramification of a state actually having it. Without that sentence being available, the prosecutor doesn't have as much.
Like a bargaining chip almost.
Exactly.
Right. I mean.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so,
because, I mean, and sometimes if you're threatening them with the death penalty, they'll admit to the other murders that they did. And
right. Which is
other
exactly
people
what
get
happened
closure.
in at least one of my cases.
In this case. And I know it's a sensitive one, and we're not going to say it yet, but
Right.
we will tell
later.
the listeners a little bit that there have been multiple TV shows on this one, and let's just say that he is still alive, and that makes me wonder. That brings me to the next question: if there's a family who is affected so horrifically by a killer, let's say, who's on trial, and what if they would have more closure for the death penalty and drawing out the process? I mean, what about that thought process?
Well, I think the Idaho case outside of Pullman, Washington.
Right.
That those victims, from my understanding, what I saw in the media was they were against the state dropping the death penalty in exchange for a guilty plea. They wanted it to go forward.
Yeah.
In the case we're kind of talking around on that we'll get to eventually, the other thing that the victims and their family gain is not seeing the evidence.
Oh, yeah.
Because in the case we're talking about indirectly, I literally had to hire a psychologist to be prepared to counsel the jurors after the trial, because what they were going to see as far as the evidence was unspeakable. And so they were going to have, it was going to be it was going to traumatize the jurors.
Again, there is TV shows about this guy. I mean, I guess you can just Google the judge's name here, and if you really want to get deep into it, but we will eventually talk about it because we have gotten some permission from the family member, but we are going to be careful what goes on. But it is relevant with the death penalty, just talking about it. Somebody so horrific who did deserve death. However, we wouldn't have found out as much of what he did if we didn't have the death penalty to bargain with.
But it does point out that in addition to getting closure by a plea to life without parole, it avoids all the trauma, not only to the jurors and the judge, frankly, but also to the family, because they usually sit through the trial and they would have seen the same thing as the jurors.
Yeah.
And that just,
Yeah.
He almost got rewarded for being so evil.
No, that's what one of the shows is. Oh, you haven't even seen all the shows. Mm-hmm. You see, our judge here is a very, very good man, and he doesn't like the true crime shows, but here he is.
It's not that I don't like him. It's just I had 27 years of true crime. I don't need to watch more.
Yeah, well, one of your most evil people is literally on Most Evil. I guess, I don't know if I can say that on here. We'll bleep it out if not, but anyways. But yeah, it's a bargaining chip. That's the most important thing about this. And most of the time, people don't even get the death penalty. It's so rare, right? Like you said, there's so many appeals. And okay, it's time to share the continuing story of True Justice.
Chapter 1. Arnie Adams steps out onto the deck of his home overlooking the Eagle River Valley. As he removes the cover from his recently purchased hot tub, he feels the warmth of the afternoon sun on his well-muscled back. After setting down his glass of single malt in the lead crystal ashtray the Starks gifted him last year, he steps down into the tub. The temperature of the clear water is only 100 degrees, warm enough to relax, but cool enough to enjoy all of his Oliva 5 Millennial Churchill cigar. These last few years have been exciting, challenging, and certainly rewarding. From a financial standpoint, I never imagined having this much success, but that was never my reason for becoming a lawyer. My goal has always been to help as many people as I can. Insurance defense work wasn't satisfying. Defending people accused of petty crimes didn't do it for me either. He taps the first inch of ash off his smoke and takes a sip of his smooth, chilled scotch. Setting it down, he looks out over the emerald green valley below. A gentle breeze coming off the distant snow-covered mountains is refreshing. Personal injury work certainly allows me to help those people that cannot help themselves, although I can only help a few people at a time. Seeing the empty chairs around the table on his deck and hearing only the gentle sound of the jets in his tub, he thinks, maybe what is really bothering me is that I'm lonely. He dismisses this thought as Kate immediately comes to his mind. She sure isn't who I thought she was when we first met. I thought she was attractive, hot even, but she was also aloof. She seemed to want to portray herself as untouchable, cold, even indifferent. All that changed after the Stark trial when she asked me out. We've been dating off and on ever since. She seems to want to take our relationship further. I suppose I would be crazy not to pursue a serious relationship with her. She constantly reminds me about how much we have in common. Our fathers are both attorneys, and we're both financially secure, driven, and intelligent. Then there is Stephanie, sweet, caring, and an advocate for people in real trouble. A woman more after my own heart. Our dating has been going well, but Steph seems reluctant to get more serious. I wonder why. Sighing, Arnie slides down until the water comes up to his chin. What do I do? Maria Lopez has always been my conscience, and I love working with her, even though I'm her boss. I feel I can confide in her. So in Chapter 1, listeners, you are introduced to another one of the main characters, Arnie Adams. You learn that he is an attorney, like his dad. You also learn that he's apparently successful given his surroundings, and he is conflicted. He doesn't appear satisfied with his career. But perhaps more importantly, his love life is conflicted because he is currently dating two women, Kate and Stephanie. Finally, you discover there's another Maria other than Maria Azul, Arturo's mother. There's also Maria Lopez, who works for Arnie Adams.
Oh, he sounds like a catch, Chip. A rich lawyer torn over two women. My goodness. Well, in our next episode, we'll continue the story of true justice, and the judge will explain the difference between not guilty and innocent, and why that difference is important.
Thanks for listening today. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Smoke and Gavel podcast. To learn more, visit judgesmallbooks.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to stay connected. Until next time, God bless.